Soli is the name of an arranging technique where multiple instruments play different melodies at the same time but with the same rhythm. So if one saxophone player were to play, and the next saxophone were to play, and the next saxophone were to play, the end result would sound something like this. This is sometimes called the thickened line. Since your ear doesn't hear each individual melody as its own thing, it just hears one big, thick melody. You might be familiar with Mr. Sandman by the Chordettes.
Mr. Sandman, yes? Bring us a dream, give him a pair of eyes with a
You can definitely get jazzy with Soli. In this example from Duke Ellington's 1957 arrangement of Sophisticated Lady, he harmonizes the saxophones in rich five-note voicings. You might notice from these examples that Soli is a relic from another time. No contemporary style of music across all genres requires knowledge of how to write Soli. You see, I studied academic jazz composition from 2007 to 2012, and I studied a style of music that is very near and dear to my heart, but is unfortunately 80 years past the zeitgeist. Jazz big band music. I spent years poring over the scores and the music of great jazz arrangers like Thad Jones, Bob Brookmeyer, and Duke Ellington, but the music of the great swing orchestras of the past has so little relevance to the music that is happening right now. Which has got me thinking, how would I take the technical knowledge of music from another era and apply it to music that I'm making right now? Alright, tonight's gig is very exciting for me because I started a new band. It's not really a band, it's more like a review, kind of like postmodern jukebox-ish.
When I am with you, there's no place I'd rather be.
Except instead of doing cutesy versions of light pop songs in a jazz style, we're doing maybe a little bit too self-serious versions in a jazz fusion style of said same pop songs.
Time to play some jazz.
See my back sweat?
Dude.
Is it good?
Oh, it's great. I wish the camera picked it up better.
Why did I wear a jacket?
Ooh. Hello. Oh, hello. This is Hannah. Oh, what music is that? I can't quite tell. It starts on a D, and then goes up to an E, and then there's an F, and then there's a G, and then there's an E that's a little bit longer than the others.
Shaking the... I can feel it.
So we didn't learn about this in jazz school. There is no chapter on 808s in arranging for large jazz ensemble. Rimsky-Korsakov seems to have forgotten to include it in his Principles of Orchestration. Pitched bass drums from the Roland TR-808 rhythm composer are for our time what the electric guitar was for the 1960s and 70s, what the synthesizer was for the 80s, and what the horn section was for the jazz big band in the 1930s and 40s. These are what I would call generational timbres, musical sounds strongly associated with moments in time. It just so happens that the technique of Soli is generational. Okay, so this is the millennial clave. It's an incredibly common rhythmic device for contemporary pop music, just the same way that the Charleston was a common rhythmic device for early jazz. Jazz big band music was the contemporary pop of the 1930s and 40s and became immensely popular in its time because of new technology, in this case, the radio. New music is often spurred on by new technology. When I was in jazz school, learning about how the great jazz musicians of the past were inspired to create their own versions of songs that they heard off of the radio, I myself was being inspired to try and imitate some of the artists that I was checking out from the internet. For example, the song E.T. by Katy Perry had a couple of awesome experimental covers, like one from Drusuf and an equally as amazing one from Knower. These inspired me to do my own experimental covers of pop songs. This is very much part of the jazz tradition, taking pop songs and reworking them into a new musical language. You can think of John Coltrane playing My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music. Jazz musicians often would play songs that were popular on the radio. As Maurice Ravel would say, whatever sauce you put around the melody is a matter of taste. What is important is the melodic line. I spent a lot of time in jazz school studying counterpoint, the study of multiple melodies with different rhythms occurring at the same time. The perfect example of this is Tomorrow Night from the South Park movie. Counterpoint is all about finding melodies that work well stacked up against one another. You don't need to know why they might work together, but counterpoint will help explain that. Melodies generally mesh well together if the distances between the notes in the melodies are consonant, usually thirds or sixths, and sometimes fifths. The most practical application of this, of course, are mashups. Now, here is the question that I would like to ask in this video. Should you, the eager young musician, even bother with going to school for music? Now, myself, I had a great time at jazz school. Not just the concert that I'm using as a framing device with a series of essay vignettes in this video, but jazz school, the academic institution. But just because I had a good time at jazz school doesn't change the fact that in today's world, with today's economy, there just is not the demand for qualified jazz musicians.
Johnson, get me 20 jazz musicians, stat!
A lot of my friends from school went on to do musical things that had absolutely nothing to do with what they studied. You're actually hearing one of those friends right now, Ivan Jackson from Brass Tracks, who co-produced Chance the Rapper's No Problem, along with another one of my classmates, Connor Rain. The skills explicitly needed to produce that track were not learned at jazz school. So it would be tempting to say that academic music is just not worth it if you're trying to make music for the real world in this era. You see, it'd be tempting to think that, but the real value in musical education doesn't really come from the specific application of knowledge. It's a rare day indeed when I have to worry about something like parallel fifths, for example. I know, parallel fifths just don't come up. Rather, the value comes from understanding how music came to be what it is on a technical level. And so you can take that knowledge and apply it to music that you didn't explicitly study. Put it this way, the more kinds of food you have in your pantry, the more recipes you can make. So whether it's 808s or saxophones, whatever sauce you put around the melody is a matter of taste. What's important is the melodic line.